Well, let's pick up the conversation then with our U.S. correspondent, Sherwin Bryce Pease, who joins us now from New York with that story. Good evening to you, Sherwin. No one can say he didn't say this. He did say that his favorite word, tariffs, and it seems now, despite the efforts by the administration to ensure that tariffs remain a central economic and foreign policy tool, this whole issue will once again be left to the courts to decide on their legality and whether they remain in place for the long term.
Well, in the absence here, Tula Sizwe, of the United States Congress asserting its authority as the Supreme Court in February ruled in striking down the tariff framework, the reciprocal tariff framework under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, the courts are stepping in, and you've seen or you heard there from the Attorney General of Arizona, one of the states among the 25 Democratic-led states that's leading this charge against the Trump administration, essentially arguing here that you cannot basically replace the statute, right? The International Emergency Economic Powers Act was then replaced by Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974 as it relates to balance of payments deficits between countries, to then be, which was also then struck down by the International Trade Court here in New York, to then be replaced by Section 301 of the very same Trade Act as it relates to foreign trade actions that undermine U.S. manufacturing, U.S. laborers. And the accusation here from the Trump administration as it relates to Section 301 is that countries have indulged in the acquisition of goods where forced labor is present, and that has been entering supply chains. So these democratic states are saying you cannot circumvent the Supreme Court ruling that affirms the power to tax, the power to impose a tariff as the purview of the United States Congress. You cannot then just replace the statute and continue as the executive to impose these tariffs. And so they're saying there's a circumvention that is happening here, ignoring what the Supreme Court delivered in a 6-3 majority opinion in February. And this is a little bit more of what Chris Mays, the Arizona Attorney General, said in terms of how these taxes, how these tariffs, how these levies are hurting American consumers and businesses. Watch.
Section 301 was never meant to be a vehicle for blanket tariffs on nearly every trading partner that we have. Section 301 requires real investigations, real consultations with foreign governments, and targeted solutions aimed at eliminating specific unfair trade practices. But that is not what happened here. The administration rushed a pretextual investigation into more than 80 countries in just 2.5 months, lumped dozens of economies into only a handful of arbitrary tariff categories, and produced no meaningful evidence linking these particular tariff levels to forced labor. What President Trump's new tariffs will do, and what they have already done, is raise prices, higher grocery bills, more expensive equipment purchased by states and small businesses, disruption across supply chains that Americans rely on every single day. When costs rise because of illegal tariffs, families and businesses pay the price, and our states feel those impacts directly.
Additionally, these states are arguing that Section 301 investigations, as it relates to these allegations of forced labor in which South Africa has been included, they argue that these were rushed and did not resemble the normal process used for major trade actions. They argue that the forced labor rationale was being used as a legal pretext to impose broad tariffs on almost all major trading partners with the United States. Section 301 usually involves a more detailed country-by-country analysis. And I think what you saw play out in terms of those investigations over the last number of months was that a number of countries were put into the same bucket, and between 10 and 12% was the result.
Yeah. So South Africa is not alone in this, Sherwin. And it feels like, it sounds like a line we've said many times. We're in good company, friend and foe alike included among the 59 countries that have been targeted for these tariffs, ranging from 10 to 12.5%. Talk to us about how these tariffs intersect with the waivers that are already in place, that have been established for certain products that come from South Africa, as well as waivers and exemptions that stem from AGOA. While you're doing that, also talk to the efforts to try and undercut all of this that have been undertaken by South African authorities.
Well, a very complicated question, and the answer probably as complicated. Essentially, remember, you've got AGOA. You've got a free trade agreement between sub-Saharan African countries that qualify as beneficiaries and the United States. That has been undercut by the various tariff regimes. It was 30% for South Africa under the Reciprocal Economic Emergency Powers Act. Then it was cut down by the Supreme Court. Then there was 10% in terms of Section 301, or Section 122 of the Trade Act. That was then struck down by the Trade Court in New York. And now you've got the 12.5% for South Africa. That also has exemptions. For example, precious metals, including the platinum group metals, gold, and certain other precious metal products are exempt from these tariffs. Citrus fruit and some other fresh agricultural products for South Africa, macadamia nuts, and a range of other groups listed by the U.S. Trade Representative's annexes. But then you have motor vehicles and many auto parts that will fall under the 12.5 levy, machinery, chemicals, and a range of other manufactured goods. And then the question becomes then, what purpose does AGOA really serve here? Not much in the context of this new tariff regime that is being imposed. And of course, DTI, Minister Parks-Tau, will tell you that they are very much advocating for an extension of AGOA here. But remember this, the African Growth and Opportunity Act was only extended for 1 year and expires at the end of this year, December 31st, 2026. So many unanswered questions of exactly what the courts will do here and what will be left for President Donald Trump to impose if this latest tariff regime, as the other previous two, is struck down by the courts.
Yeah, it's all starting to sound like a labyrinth of regulation and tariffs that needs to be navigated. Thank you for the update. That's SABC News U.S. correspondent Sherwin Bryce Peace with that update from New York.